everyone, and welcome back to Brought to the Table, a show where I, Luke Jones, get to talk about some of my favorite tabletop games of all time. So today we're actually taking a look at one that is actually relatively new to the tabletop gaming space from a studio that's also relatively new to the space as well. And that is Moonrakers by Ivy Games. Or Ivy Studios specifically. This is actually the Kickstarter edition. I actually backed this on Kickstarter last year because I was very excited about the theme and deck building, because deck building is actually one of my favorite mechanics in tabletop games. I really just like kind of building up my deck as I'm playing through the game specifically. And Moonrakers had this really kind of awesome feel where essentially you're just kind of like you're your own bounty hunter kind of in a way, where you're kind of going out and doing missions for folks in your ship. It's a really colorful game, and the interesting idea is that the studio is really actually known as like an animation shop before they actually jumped into tabletop games. So I was really curious because I actually come from like that digital marketing background of like making websites for, different companies and such, and that's really what Ivy Studio was, or still is. But I was really interested to check this out. So became one of my favorite games. So I'm going to come and talk to you about this game at my table. So without further ado, let's start showing off this game, because this game is absolutely gorgeous. Let's get to it. Let's just get to it right now. So right now what I'm showing you is kind of like the basic setup of Moonrakers right over here. Apologies because the light is coming in through my window, but you know what, screw it, whatever. We do things by the seat of our pants here at Brought to the Table. So the goal of Moonrakers is to be the first player to get to 10 prestige points, essentially victory points. If you hear me refer to as victory points throughout the conversation, that's what I'm talking about specifically. And you are trying to compete to get there faster before the other players. And what's nice is that Moonrakers comes with these little handy-dandy little guide boards, which will actually get more to you into the production side of the game, to actually let you know what's going on. So the way that you actually gain prestige is by completing contracts, which are the main way that you're essentially going to be gaining resources within the game. Whether it's prestige points, whether it's money to buy cards, or if it's actually gaining bonus cards that you can grab for free. And so really how a turn works is that you have basically two options. One of them is, we'll talk about the more simple one, is to stay at base, which essentially means that you gain a coin, which adds to basically your money supply. You get to take out one of these contracts right here, because they might be too difficult, so you might get rid of it and discard it, and you can take one of these objective cards. So you'll grab two, and you'll take one and discard the other. These objectives are basically secret ways for you to gain prestige that other players cannot. So that's one way. Now the other thing you can do on your turn, which is kind of the main thing you really want to try to shoot for on your turn, is to try to attempt a contract. The main purpose of Moonrakers is essentially it's trying to create a negotiation-style deck-building game where you have to negotiate with other players to try to attempt contracts, split the rewards, and use that as a way for you to kind of build up your deck, build up your own ship's engine, and then try to start going for these contracts on your own to be able to score the last bit of prestige in order to win the game. So basically how that would work is that you'll choose a contract and basically ask if anyone wants to become your ally on the contract. You'll negotiate. Then you'll be able to negotiate different rewards on the contract. So I'm going to take this bomber screen right here, if I can pick it up. And on the card, you're going to see a prestige amount, which is how much prestige will be awarded, as well as how much money will be awarded to you as well. Now, you, between any of the number of players playing in the game, can actually negotiate how much of the reward each player will get from this particular reward. One important thing to note is that you can't screw your opponents over. You have to split that up, and that's predetermined once the contract ends and all that stuff. Now, on top of that, you can also negotiate what is called the hazard dice. So before you would ever attempt a contract, once all the players are kind of ready and going into the contract, you'll look at the card and see how many of these little warning rectangles there are, and that's how many of these dice you'll roll. And then, based off the number of hazard symbols, that's actually how much prestige you're going to lose at the end of the contract, whether it's completed or if it's failed. Now, there's ways to block these, but that is also something you negotiate to actually see if someone's going to want the bigger reward. Be like, hey, you're going to roll the hazard dice. So that's what players are going to do. Now, in order to do that, each player starts essentially with one action, and then based off that action count, they have to be able to play different cards that equal these symbols that are on each one of these cards. They represent damage, they represent thrusters, they represent reactors, they represent shields, and crewmates, which are these purple with the person icon on them. You have to basically play as many cards as that particular requirement asks you to do so. So none of these are relatively super simple, but we're going to pretend that in my hand that I drew of my little deck, I have a thruster and I have a damage. So there you go. We're going to pretend I have those in my hand. Now the thing is that on your turn, you only get one action. And playing a card, it counts as one action. So the only way that you are able to gain more actions is by playing reactors, which allow you to gain 2 immediate actions on top of that played one right there. So after playing this, I have 2 more actions I can take. I can then even play more reactors to kind of boost the amount of actions I would gain. But it's not just, reactors give me actions. Other things like thrusters, when I play them, allow me to draw 2 cards from the top of my deck. There's other things, such as shields, where in the example of the hazard dice right there, so let's pretend that I did have those 3 hazards, I can actually use the shields to block the amount of hazards that would target that specific player who rolled the dice. So there's all sorts of things that these cards can do. Now, damage outright doesn't necessarily do anything specific, but unlike the other cards in this game, damage can actually have different values on it. So you can have damage values that have a 2 side, or actually have a 3 side on them. That's also something very interesting with this game, is that all the cards that you're seeing right now are the only cards that can ever be actually added to your specific deck. Unlike other deck builders where there are tons of unique types of cards, these are basically kind of the core cards that you're going to see within your deck. We'll get to more of that here in a second. So, players kind of go back and forth, basically using up their action pool in order to basically play cards down to complete these contracts. If they complete the contract, they gain the rewards, the contract is discarded, and a new one is then replaced. Now, these contracts are going to either be incredibly easy to complete, or they're going to be really difficult. So, a lot of these contracts are going to require you to actually have to negotiate with your fellow players to, start trying to get some rewards, get some resources, so that way not only you can start moving up on the prestige track, you can also gain more money to start purchasing crew members or ship parts, which is where the deck building kind of starts to come into play here. No matter if you stay at base or you attempt a contract, you are going to be able to, at the end of that, buy something from here, from the crew area or the ship parts area. Now, the way that this works is that a crew member is a very unique card, where essentially it's a traditional deck building style where this card has unique effects on it, and you get to complete those effects when you would play it towards trying to complete a contract. So, for example, let's look at Milo Distor right here. So discard any number of cards and draw an equal number and then +1 action. It's important to note that when you would play a crew member, this does count as an action. So the fact that this one actually gives you another action afterwards is pretty good. And that's a pretty good ability as well. So, let's say if I bought this, any cards that you would gain go in your discard pile, basically like any other traditional deck building game, and then a new crew member is added to the stack immediately. Now, ship parts are a little different. Now, I haven't shown this off yet because space on my little area right here, but each player is actually going to start with a board that's going to represent essentially their ship. Each board has 4 slots for ship parts on them. When you purchase a ship part, you're going to take that part by spending the amount of money located at the very bottom right here, and then you're going to equip it on one of the 4 slots. You can have a maximum of 4 different ship parts at any time. Now, one, which is kind of one of the big things, is that you gain this passive ability right here. So this one says, for each shield played, it also counts as 1 damage. That's actually really good. I haven't seen that part yet. So there you go. So that actually makes shields count as double, so that makes your shields even more effective towards completing contracts. It's also important to note, too, that when you are an ally helping out another player completing a contract, your abilities take place on your cards. So your cards also, grant extra abilities and stuff towards completing that contract. Might make you a more valuable player to try to go on contracts with, so that's also something to keep in mind as well. But you'll notice, too, that there's this little icon at the top that shows one of the main symbols: shields, thrusters, reactors, etc., with a number underneath it. Whenever you purchase a ship part, you immediately gain that many cards and put them into your discard pile. So in this case, I would actually take 2 shields from this giant, pile of shields that come with the game and just add that to my discard pile that I decided to shuffle back into a deck, because when you talk at the same time when you're showing off a game, sometimes that's difficult. But hey, what can you do? But there you go. So that's actually kind of what makes this part of the deck building unique with Moonrakers, is the fact that it's not like traditional where when you would buy a card that immediately gets put in your discard pile, you're actually buying a part that's giving you a specific number of cards for that particular type of card. And you could do that for all the different parts right here. And just like with the crew members deck, as soon as you would have purchased a part, a new one comes into play. Now, one important thing to note is that as you're building up your ship right here, once you run out of room to actually, once you fill up all your slots, if you do want to buy another ship part, what you'll need to do is that you'll need to cover one of your ship parts, essentially just discarding the old part. Now, however, any of the cards that were associated with that one you got rid of still stay in your deck. So you're just replacing the passive ability that exists on your particular ship part. But that's kind of the gist of the game right there, is to gain more of those cards to kind of make certain, your deck a little bit more consistent in different avenues, give it a different abilities, especially when you have these different passive abilities that are located on your ship parts. So that is essentially how you play Moonrakers right there. It's a pretty straightforward game, a little negotiation, pretty straightforward deck building. Players basically just go back and forth, gaining money, using that to spend to buy crewmates and ship parts. They're completing contracts, possibly by themselves or with other players, and they're trying to be the first player to gain prestige right here. All while trying to possibly maybe complete one of their secret objectives so they can gain extra prestige, trying to ignore these hazard dice as they come their way, all that fun stuff. So that is essentially the gist of Moonrakers. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to Moonrakers is actually the production of the game itself. Now, I'm about to make a very bold statement, and I know a lot of people that I've talked to also agree with me on this. Moonrakers is the absolutely best production value I've ever seen in any tabletop game whatsoever. Straight up, period, no questions asked. So for full disclosure, I did back the game on Kickstarter, but I only got the main Kickstarter core box version. What that basically means is that this box right here contains the Moonrakers expansion inside of it that includes basically aliens, contracts, ship parts, and crewmates. It doesn't contain any of the metal ships that you could have possibly gotten with the game or any of the other special add-ons. It just included basically the fancy box as well as the extra expansion. Now, first things first, when it comes to the actual production, the game insert inside here is absolutely fantastic. One of the best that I've ever seen in any tabletop game, period. It has a slot for each one of the plastic ships. It has slots for each of the coins, the hazard dice, and actually it shows you for each one of the card types. You can't see it that super well with the camera because how dark it is, but there's actually a slot for each one of the card types, from crewmates to the objectives to the contracts, the different types of cards you're going to put in your deck. It actually has that all laid out super nicely, and this part up here indents, so you can actually put in all the different boards in there as well. This insert is absolutely fantastic. It makes it super easy to basically put the game away and pick it back up. So, pretty easy, straightforward box. One of the best parts of this. Second thing too, like I mentioned, I did not get the metal ships with the Kickstarter specifically. And these plastic ships are still pretty dope. I really like the design of them, and the plastic on them is pretty strong. Oh, as I drop it right there. But as you can see, it just bounced right back up. There's no chipping on it whatsoever. These bad boys are pretty awesome. I probably just made a few of you cry a little bit on the inside as you saw that happen, but hey, it's okay. On top of that, these dice are super well made. They are custom dice. They have these little unique hazard symbols on them. I've already played this game a bunch, and nothing's chipped on these dice whatsoever. They're very well made, so props to them. They feel really nice to roll, especially as someone who's played a lot of Star Wars Destiny. There's nothing better to be able to play, chuck some dice that are really well made quality. They don't feel cheap whatsoever. Now, when it comes to the actual card quality, I've played some games recently that I've been trying to up the card quality by having a little bit more matting on the card, so it's not just like straight normal, like a little bit finished cardstock. These are matted, but the problem with some games is that they overmat the card to the point where they actually bend a little bit and they actually feel not necessarily wet, but they're just like way too heavy and too glossy and stuff. This is the perfect style. I know folks love to sleeve their cards, and for those of you who know me very well, I don't typically like to sleeve my stuff. But this Moonraker specifically is why I don't sleeve. These are made so well that they're very smooth. The printing on them is very fantastic. It's a very well made card. And this is with all the different types of cards, from even the squares for the objectives and the contracts. All these are all very well made. They're very sturdy. I'm not going to bend them super much because that would make me cringe myself. But it's not like if you were to bend another card where you can actually possibly break the middle and stuff like that. These cards are very well made. Absolutely incredible. Now, I do have to say one thing. The graphic design in this game is absolutely fantastic. As someone who has a lot of user experience, background from my degree, as well as I actually do a lot of graphic design for my web work that I do and for what I teach. This is absolutely some of the best iconography, best layout design on any card I've ever seen in any tabletop game whatsoever. It's very straightforward. It's to the point. One of the things I always tell people is the fact that it does a very good job of, for those of color blindness, actually lining up stuff like using the iconography to make sure folks know what those things are. You can identify it by the icon or the color, and that goes with all the different ship parts as well, and the crewmates. All these different ship parts actually are associated with a different company. So this one says Sorlia, I think. I don't know how to pronounce space words, but all the Sorlias are actually purple, but it actually says it on the card itself. And on top of that, they also have everything is very well laid out on these cards. The text is great. The actual artwork that they use on these cards as well is absolutely fantastic. All the ship parts specifically have all different imagery on them. Now, that's not the same for the contracts. They do reuse some of the artwork on some of these. You can actually tell by looking at both of these. They do have the same artwork on them. But there's still there's still a bunch of different art that exists within the contracts. But with it, the crewmates share the same thing with the ship parts. All these different crewmates that exist within the deck are different, and they all have different artwork on them, and it's all stellar. It's this really kind of simplistic, dark sci-fi style, and it was actually half the reason why I wanted to back the game in the first place, was just the fact that I absolutely adore this style of art in games in general. It's really cool. I have not seen that one yet. As you can tell, I played this game a bunch, and I still have not seen everything in Moonrakers yet. So, absolutely fantastic on these as well. I really just dig the art style of this game. The iconography on everything is just absolutely stellar. It really kind of gets to a point when you are looking at the main deck, or just your cards in general. The fact how simple these cards are when you're playing is just that's a reactor, that's a shield. It's really good to see. It's a really easy game to teach, which we will get to. But all that fun stuff, it just really helps bring the game to light. And not to mention, too, these boards, I even talked about the boards. Normally in games, these things are kind of superfluous, but the fact that they took the time to actually lay this out and kind of help the player, know where things are and replace stuff. And on top of that, the player board specifically actually tell you what each player's starting, deck should be. Now, the game rules do say what everyone's starting deck should look like, because everyone starts with the same cards, but it also tells you down here, which is a nice little touch. On top of that, stuff like these boards right here that hold all the cards, obviously superfluous with the stuff that you need to have, but it's nice to have just to kind of lay it out, make this game look very pretty on the table, and all that fun stuff. Does a very good job even laying out the rows where cards are for their idea. And the last thing I have to mention, that this is not a Kickstarter exclusive, so I have to say this. These coins that you use for your currency in the game are basically just metal coins. And they're absolutely great to, play around with. I've played lots of games where a lot of it is a chunky cardboard or punch out stuff, where that's kind of the currency that you use to play with the game. But these just really kind of help, make those games stand out. It's not something that needed to happen. You honestly could have just done something like plastic punch outs, but the fact that they took the extra step to actually make these metal is absolutely fantastic, because you're definitely going to be using these coins a lot as you're playing the game to purchase different things. And I also got to give a shout out that they actually did a really good job putting together this reference card right here. Essentially a reference card for each player, laying out basically what you can do on your turn, and some other things as well, just some miscellaneous things that you might need to know. It's absolutely great. Plus, I do got to give a huge shout out. The rule book is absolutely stunning. It walks you through basically everything that you need to know from setting up the game. And also, one of my favorite things from games nowadays is actually, regardless of how simple the game is, there is actually a glossary of terms and an FAQ at the back. that actually walks you through possibly different things that can happen, as well as, talks about doing some stuff for solo and two-player scenarios and some different, actual examples of gameplay, which is really nice as well. So that helps out too. From a teacher standpoint, it's always nice to actually see a practical example, and especially for a game that makes, is very simple on paper, but also could be really complex with negotiation and stuff. It's really nice to actually see these practical examples in the game specifically to kind of help out clarify anything. Because I know first time we were playing, obviously always have questions, and it was just really nice to be able to open up the rule book, get to where you think it's supposed to be, you find the answer, done. Close the rule book, get back to playing pretty quick. Doesn't take more than a minute or two just to even solve any of those simple questions. So, absolutely fantastic production overall. Like I said, Moonrakers, I don't think there's any game I have in my collection or I have ever seen or played that actually has the quality of Moonrakers specifically. This is stunning, A+, S+, whatever you want to call it. No game beats the production of Moonrakers. Now, in terms of playing Moonrakers, what I really enjoy about this game specifically is the fact that I am not typically a player that likes negotiation style of games. But Moonrakers specifically is actually really requiring you to do such a thing because all these contracts, they give you a lot more of the prestige points, and there's a lot of them that exist within this contract deck. They really require you to negotiate with your opponents in order to try to accomplish these. Even for the ones that don't necessarily give you a whole lot of rewards, some of them specifically, especially at the beginning of the game, you're going to require to have to work with your opponents. And that's really where the mind games of this game come in. It's not even necessarily a lot about the deck building. The deck building specifically is trying to make it so you can actually try to complete contracts on your own without your opponents, with the combination of the ship parts as well as, using your deck of cards specifically. But even for the ones that would necessarily, like this one right here, where to give you 5 prestige, there's no way in combination of cards from even if you got a full slotted ship part for your ship and everything, that you're going to be able to complete that on your own, unless you really got super lucky. That's where the negotiation part comes in, and it becomes incredibly fun to do as you're talking with your opponents, seeing what cards that they have, where everyone's talking about what's in their hand, all that stuff to kind of figure out what you can do. Because one of the things that I found that was really interesting about this is that since the hazard dice are a thing, the hazard dice are essentially a way to bargain who is essentially going to get the most reward out of the deal. On top of that, too, something I've learned is that you can use that as a tactic to try to screw your opponents over. Because you, as the player, don't have to choose to play certain cards down. Now, like I said, the rewards and stuff have to be set. So if you and the other player decide that you're going to split this 3-2 victory points, 5-6 money, and then one of them gets the card, you can do that, and then if that gets completed, that's fine. But, if you have someone roll the hazard dice, and they roll 6 hazards right there, and they are expecting you to contribute, you might just sit there and be like, nope, I'm not going to contribute anything whatsoever, or very little at all, period, to get that accomplished whatsoever, make them lose a bunch of prestige towards their goal. So there's a lot of negotiation, but the thing is, even with that being said, if you do that to screw your opponent over, you're not gaining resources to buy more parts that are going to allow you to try to solo these contracts. Because that's kind of the whole gimmick of the game, is to try to get enough resources, to gather enough parts and cards, so you can start trying to take these out on your own without the help of your opponents. On top of that, too, what helps is that a lot of these secret objective cards allow you to kind of incentivize going after certain contracts. As they'll talk about, for this one, it says, complete a delivery contract alone. So the contracts have different types. So like these yellow ones that actually say delivery contract on them, you'll want to try to figure out how to get those without using your opponents. So even if it's simple, if it says 1 prestige, you could turn that easily into 2 prestige by getting your objective. On top of that, too, getting these is pretty easy, especially for the fact that when you do take the stay at base action, you essentially get another objective, and there's essentially no limit to the amount of objectives you have, besides the fact that you just have too many. You don't have a focus on what you're doing. So in order to try to accomplish more tasks within the game. So it's really nice. I really dig it. I also really kind of like the fact that the way the deck building is treated in this game, it's a lot different than typical deck builders where, you usually have your row of cards out and those immediately just go into your discard pile. But the fact that the crewmates obviously work like normal, but these don't directly necessarily always go towards completing the contract. Now, a lot of these cards over here do show crewmate numbers that you need to play, but remember, crewmates do cost money, and you're only getting one of them at a time. So rather than trying to actually get other symbols, crewmates are more of a special card, so you're not going to be buying them as much. There's a lot more of these contracts in here that don't show off the crewmates, so they're a little bit more of a special case. Some of them actually allow you to reduce the amount for a particular portion of the contract by like 2. Some of them allow you to trash, which basically, like any other typical deck builder, get rid of bad cards that are in your deck. You start with a miss, and misses don't do anything, so it would be nice to get rid of that. Or possibly other cards to try to make your deck a little bit more honed in and focused on one particular type. That type of ordeal. But the ship parts, I think, are really the most spectacular part of the game, where essentially you're basically equipping this to your ship, and you're really only gaining 1 or 2 cards off the deal of one kind, and those cards aren't necessarily unique. Like I talked about earlier, it's not like there's going to be 3 different versions of a thruster. Thrusters always draw 2 cards. Reactors always give you immediate 2 actions. Shields always block hazards. Those types of things. Now, the ship parts will allow you to modify how those work, but that's really where the deck building is that these ship parts are really doing the job of the deck building and making the cards actually unique that are in your hand. They'll give you all sorts of different abilities and ways to basically modify the way that you're playing the game. And on top of that, the objectives as well go towards for how these work. There are different objectives for, owning one of each different type of ship part. One for basically overriding one of these once you have 4. So basically putting one on top to all that stuff. Possibly having 3 of a particular type of ship part. Because I know specifically the Magnomi, there's one in the objective deck. I've had that a few times when playing. Having 3 of those, and then you get to reveal that one. There's all sorts of things that these particular ship parts actually help add to the game that I think does a very good job of spicing up the way that deck builders are played. I think that's one of the things that deck builders have been really lacking, is that they really haven't done anything outside the typical, here's a row of cards, buy some cards, and then use those cards to either, gain points by just having them, or using them to gain points by taking out another different row. Here, you still have, there's essentially 3 different rows of cards in this deck building, but you're not buying these contracts. You're using cards from these 2 rows in a very unique, different way compared to most deck builders to accomplish these. And on top of that, to accomplish this, there's a lot more negotiation. It's not like, cooperative deck builders where everyone's kind of talking out like what they have in their hand and try to take care of stuff. Here, everyone's using cards directly in their hand at once to try to accomplish one of these. And then you're trying to do it in a way that's going to help benefit you more than your opponent, because you have to negotiate that, and sometimes that negotiation is going to fail. So it's really interesting. I really dig it. And the thing is, what helps is that it sounds complex on paper. Negotiating, buying these ship cards, making sure your crewmate cards are right towards what you want to do, these objectives and all that stuff. It sounds a lot on paper, but because of the fact that all these cards are really simple, like they literally tell you exactly what they do on the card. These objective cards specifically are very straightforward. The contracts don't necessarily have anything super complex about them besides, they get more difficult as you go on with the bigger rewards. This game is incredibly simple just by the fact of how everything kind of connects together. And that's what I really dig about this game is how complex on paper it sounds. Playing this with other players, immediately everyone picks it up where everyone's kind of negotiating out what they're trying to do, gain better parts, try to attempt these contracts on their own, screw their opponents over by, maybe trying to rack up a bunch of objectives at once, maybe trying to make them fail a contract, or possibly try to get the most benefit out of completing a contract together, that type of ordeal. There's a lot that's going on that I really do dig about this game because of the fact of how simple it is to pick up and play. I also do have to say that the 2-player variant is still actually very strong. I'm not showing it here, but essentially what they do in 2-player, and solo as well, is that there is another deck that exists that's kind of like a global deck that's called the Mercenary deck, where you actually spend money to basically use those cards when completing contracts. Since there's now another 3rd player to do better negotiation with, you can still negotiate in 2 players, but you can use that Mercenary deck to basically help you complete the contracts, and I actually think it works very well for what this game is trying to do. I still probably would say at least, to have the best experience with the game, 3 players is the best way to go about doing it, but for 2-player and solo, I think that works very well to help kind of suffice that 3rd player negotiation need that the players will definitely need to have when trying to complete some of these more complex contracts right here. So yeah, there you go. That's a lot of my feelings on Moonrakers right there. It's an incredible game. I very much enjoy this a lot. It's very much up my alley for the type of player that I am when I like to play my tabletop games. So there you have it, folks. That's a lot of my opinions and feelings on Moonrakers right there. So right now, you can actually go ahead and pick up some extra copies of this at the ID Studios website. So if you want to go get in on this game, I recommend you do now because this was a Kickstarter exclusive. It's, you know, you might be able to go pick up some copies at your local retailer if they got some of the retail copies from the backing on Kickstarter. I know my local game store actually has a bunch of them at their store. So definitely get on this if you really want to jump in on the Moonrakers hype. I also know that you can actually get it, some copies of Moonrakers through the Veiled Fate Kickstarter, which is essentially IV Studios' next game that they're doing on Kickstarter, which I strongly recommend that you go back on that one as well. I actually really am looking forward to how that one's turning out. Saw some playthroughs. I'm really digging the production as well as the also negotiation, not necessarily negotiation, but more mind games deduction style that game is offering specifically. Now, for Moonrakers, who is this game really for? If you are a fan of any type of negotiation style of game, I definitely think this one is right up your alley specifically. Especially because I think that's what really got me with this game. I don't normally like that style of game. I usually associate that with like party games and things like that. And that's more of not my style of tabletop or interaction. But this one does it in a very good way of just, you know, working together but also against each other at the same time. And I really kind of dig that, especially because you're using that to help ramp yourself up so you can do more things by yourself. And then as you're growing, you're going to become more of a target to your opponents, so they're not going to work with you. But then you might start get behind if your opponents start to creep up ahead of you, and then you actually become a new negotiable target. So those types of folks, you're really going to dig this. If you are a deck builder, you will like this game. I will say, though, as someone who's definitely played a lot of two-player deck building in my lifetime, this game definitely shines the best at 3 players. So try to see if you can get a third real-life player to play this with you. I have played this with both 3-player and 2-player, and I will say the 3-player experience has definitely been the most fun, but 2-player still works very well. So definitely, you know, do not think that's going to scare you away. But if you do want the best experience, I would say 3+ is definitely the way to go with this game. Now, in terms of age group, the game does say 14+, and I do agree with that. Like I said, the game is on paper a relatively simple game, but there is a lot of different things you have to think about, and I do think a younger audience might get a little bit more confused at this concept where they have to try to negotiate with the different players around the board to try to attempt those contracts. So I do think the age group on this is actually just right for what we were looking at for, especially getting that teenage years, all those teenage angst is coming out. You want to go talk to everybody, and talking through Moonrakers is the way that you're going to try to flirt with that person that you really want to be with, you know, during your high school days. Not trying to do, you know, anyway. But having said that all, Moonrakers is an absolutely fantastic game. I have to actually say in this video, Moonrakers is my tabletop game of the year of 2020. It has definitely surprised me beyond belief of the production, how much fun I'm having with the game. I haven't actually felt this way about a game since I've actually played Disney Villainous, where I actually don't want to stop playing the game. The only downside is the fact that really I need to have 3 players to play this consistently. But luckily, I do a weekly game week, or a game night during my weeks. So we've been playing this a lot since I've gotten my Kickstarter copy. So we've been really having lots of fun with this game. So I strongly recommend that if you're a fan of deck builders, if you're a fan of negotiation, if you're a fan of combination of those, if you like space, if you like really pretty games, you like games with really high production value, Moonrakers is the game for you. This is Luke Jones's, or brought to the table's, game of the year, Moonrakers. Please buy this game. It is worth your time and your money. And that's it. This is another episode of Brought to the Table. I hope you folks enjoy this one. And please go give Ivy Studios some love. Go back their new game on Kickstarter, Veiled Fate, as well as buy Moonrakers. It's absolutely fantastic. I just can't sit here and just not stop raving about the game. That's why I do this show, because I like games. But having said that, though, I hope you folks have a wonderful day. And tune in next time when we see what the next game I bring to the table will be. See you around, folks. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brought to You. Cut. Whoa! I can't even say my own correctly.